Have you ever seen a man so arrogant, so sure of his own victory, that he started celebrating while the enemy was still in the room? Caleb Sterling thought he had committed the perfect crime, a divorce that would leave his wife penniless and leave him with the empire they built together. He had the best lawyers money could buy. He had the judge in his pocket. He had the mistress waiting in the car. But Caleb forgot one thing. He never asked who his wife's father really was. He thought he was winning a divorce case. He didn't realize he was walking into an execution. You are not going to believe who walks through those courtroom doors. The sound of the cork popping was aggressive, echoing off the mahogany walls of the private conference room like a gunshot. It was a premature sound, a sound of victory declared before the war was officially over. But Caleb Sterling didn't care about superstitions. "To freedom," Caleb said, raising the crystal flute. The bubbles hissed, rising to the surface just like his ego. Gavin Spector, his attorney, a man who charged $600 an hour to destroy families, smirked but didn't drink. "Caleb, we're still in recess. The judge hasn't signed the decree. Technically, you are still a married man for another 45 minutes. Caleb laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He walked to the window of the high-rise office in downtown Manhattan, looking down at the ants scurrying along the pavement. "Technically, Gavin, I've been single since the day Beatrice stopped trying to look good for me, since the day she decided that supporting my dream meant nagging me about overhead costs. The judge is going to sign. We crushed her in deposition. She didn't even fight back on the Hamptons house. She's broken. It's over." Caleb took a long sip of the expensive vintage. It tasted like success. It had been a brutal 2-year battle, or at least it was supposed to be. Caleb had founded Sterling Logistics 5 years ago. When he started, he was nobody, just a guy with a truck and a hustle. Beatrice had been there then. She was the one who did the books at the kitchen table. She was the one who took the night shifts at the diner to pay for his first fleet insurance. But Caleb didn't like to remember that version of Beatrice. He preferred the version he had painted for the court, the leech, the unsupportive, dowdy housewife who contributed nothing to the multi-million-dollar empire he now commanded. She looked pathetic today, didn't she? Caleb mused, turning back to his lawyer. Gavin shuffled his papers. She was quiet, unusually quiet. Her lawyer, that public defender type, what's his name? Mr. Prain. He hasn't raised a single objection regarding the hidden assets in the Cayman accounts. Honestly, Caleb, it makes me nervous. It's too easy. It's not easy, Gavin. It's dominance, Caleb snapped, adjusting his silk tie. Beatrice is a librarian's daughter from Ohio. She doesn't have the stomach for this. She saw the forensic accounting reports you fabricated. Adjusted. And she folded. She just wants out. Caleb checked his Rolex. 2:15 p.m. "Jessica is waiting for me at the plaza," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We have a flight to the Maldives tonight. First class. I want this wrap-up to be quick. Go in there, crush whatever last dignity she has, and get Judge Anthony Calvetti to bang that gavel." "Calvetti likes you," Gavin admitted. "He hates emotional women. And Beatrice has been weeping silently into a handkerchief for 3 hours. It plays well for us." Caleb finished his drink and slammed the glass down. "Exactly. She's the emotional wreck. I'm the stable business leader. It's a done deal. Let's go finish her." They walked out of the conference room and down the marble hallway of the courthouse. Caleb walked with a swagger, his chest puffed out. He nodded to a security guard who didn't know him. He felt like a king. He didn't know that kings are usually the first to lose their heads. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was stale and smelled of floor wax and despair. Beatrice Sterling sat at the defendant's table. She was small, her frame hidden beneath a grey, shapeless cardigan that made her look 10 years older than 32. Her hair, usually a vibrant chestnut, was pulled back into a severe, fraying bun. She stared at her hands, which were folded neatly in her lap. To the casual observer, she looked defeated. Broken. But if Caleb had bothered to look closer, if he had ever really looked at his wife in the last 3 years, he might have noticed that her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't wringing them in anxiety. They were clasped in the stillness of someone who is waiting for a train they know is on time. Beside her sat Arthur Prane. He was an inexpensive lawyer, the kind you find on a bus bench advertisement. He wore a suit that was slightly too large and smelled faintly of mothballs. He was shuffling papers nervously, sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning. "Mrs. Sterling," Prane whispered, his voice trembling. "Are you sure you don't want to contest the alimony offer? $500 a month it's insulting. The man is worth $50 million. Beatrice didn't look up. Her voice was soft, barely audible. "Let him have his moment, Mr. Prane. It's important that he feels he has won everything." "But the house, the stocks," Prane hissed. "He's taking it all. He's claiming you contributed nothing to the business. We have the tax returns from 2018. We can prove you were the CFO in all but name." "No," Beatrice said firmly. She finally looked up, her eyes striking and oddly clear. "No objections. Let the record show he claimed total ownership. Let the record show he claimed I was nobody." The heavy oak doors swung open. Caleb entered, followed by Gavin. The energy in the room shifted. Caleb sucked up all the oxygen. He smirked at Beatrice as he passed her table. "Nice cardigan, B," he whispered. "Get it at Goodwill? You better get used to shopping there." Beatrice didn't flinch. She just watched him take his seat. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Anthony Calvetti swept into the room. He was a man who loved the sound of his own voice and the power of his position. He had a reputation in the circuit for favoring the self-made man narrative. He sat down, adjusting his robes, and peered over his spectacles at the two parties. "Be seated," Calvetti grunted. "We are back on the record in the matter of Sterling versus Sterling. Mr. Spector, do you have the final settlement agreement?" "We do, Your Honor," Gavin said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. He handed a thick document to the clerk. "My client, Mr. Sterling, has been incredibly generous. Despite Mrs. Sterling's lack of financial contribution to the marriage or the business entity known as Sterling Logistics, he's offering a lump sum of $10,000 and a monthly stipend of $500 for 2 years. In exchange, Mr. Sterling retained sole ownership of the company, the marital home in Tribeca, the Hamptons estate, and all investment portfolios." The judge nodded, skimming the document. "And the wife waives all rights to future earnings?" "She does, Your Honor." Judge Calvetti looked at Arthur Prane. "Mr. Prane, does your client agree to these terms? I must warn you, if you drag this to a trial, based on what I've seen so far, she might end up with even less. The court does not look kindly on spouses who ride the coattails of successful entrepreneurs." Arthur Prane stood up, his knees knocking against the table. He looked at Beatrice. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We accept the terms, Your Honor," Prane stammered. Caleb let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. A grin spread across his face. He turned to Gavin and winked. It was over. He had pulled off the heist of the century. He had hidden $20 million in shell companies, and she was signing off on it for pennies. "Very well," Judge Calvetti said, picking up his pen. "I see no reason to delay. This marriage is irretrievably broken. The division of assets is approved." The scratching of the pen on paper sounded like a scream to Arthur Prane, but to Caleb it sounded like music. However, the judge paused, looking at the clock. Before I officially stamp the decree absolute, are there any final statements from the parties? Gavin stood. No, Your Honour. My client just wishes to move on and continue building the economy. Mrs. Sterling? The judge looked at her with pity, bordering on disdain. Beatrice stood up. For the first time all day, she stood to her full height. She smoothed the front of her cheap cardigan. I have no statement regarding the settlement, Your Honour, Beatrice said. Her voice was different now. The waver was gone. It was cool, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. But my father is in the building. He wished to witness the conclusion of the proceedings. I would like to request a brief recess to allow him to enter. Caleb laughed out loud. He couldn't help it. Her father? He scoffed, loud enough for the court reporter to hear. Your Honour, her father is a corn farmer from Ohio who probably doesn't own a suit. Why do we need to drag this out for a family reunion? Judge Calvetti looked annoyed. Mrs. Sterling, this is highly irregular. Is your father a party to this case? He has a vested interest in the assets being discussed, Beatrice said. This is ridiculous, Caleb interrupted, standing up. She's stalling. She's trying to guilt-trip me. I just want to sign and leave. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the judge snapped, though he didn't look angry at him. He looked at Beatrice. 5 minutes. If he isn't here in 5 minutes, I sign the order, and you are dismissed. Thank you, Beatrice said. She sat down. Caleb leaned over to her. Really, Bay? Daddy? Is he going to come in here with a pitchfork and threaten me? You're pathetic. Beatrice turned her head slowly. She looked at Caleb, and for the first time in years, he felt a chill run down his spine. There was no love in her eyes. There was no hate either. There was only the cold, hard look of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. My father isn't a farmer, Caleb, she whispered. Oh? What is he then? A mechanic? You never asked, she said simply. You were always so busy talking about yourself. You never asked about the Halloway name. You just assumed. Assumed what? That I was nobody. The 5 minutes ticked by, agonizingly slowly. Caleb tapped his pen on the table. Gavin checked his emails. The court reporter yawned. Time is up, Judge Calvetti said, capping his pen. Mrs. Sterling, your father is clearly not... Boom. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown open with such force that they hit the backstops with a thunderous crack. Every head in the room swiveled. 2 large men in dark suits entered first. They weren't court security. They were private security, wearing earpieces and suits that cost more than Caleb's car. They scanned the room with professional paranoia before stepping aside. Then he entered. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 70s, but he moved with a vitality that defied his age. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that was tailored to perfection. He leaned on a cane topped with a silver lion's head, but it seemed more like a weapon than a walking aid. His hair was white, swept back, and his face was a map of deep lines and hard decisions. But it was his eyes that froze the room. They were the same shade as Beatrice's, steel grey. But where hers were calm, his were fierce. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Caleb frowned. This man didn't look like a farmer. He looked like money. Old money. Dangerous money. Judge Calvetti, usually the tyrant of his domain, went pale. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He took off his glasses and squinted, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Is that... Gavin Spector whispered beside Caleb, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "Oh my God. Caleb, that's Silas." "Silas who?" Caleb hissed. "Who is that old geezer?" Gavin looked at Caleb with wide, panicked eyes. "You idiot! You didn't run a background check on her family? That is Silas Halloway, the Lion of London. He was the lead prosecutor at The Hague. He runs Halloway and Croft. It's the biggest international corporate law firm in the world." Caleb's stomach dropped. "Her dad is a lawyer." "No," Gavin said, sweating. "He's not a lawyer. He's the lawyer. He eats people like you for breakfast." Silas Halloway walked down the center aisle. The sound of his cane hitting the floor was a rhythmic metronome of doom. Tap, tap, tap. He didn't look at Caleb. He didn't look at the judge. He walked straight to the defendant's table and placed a hand on Beatrice's shoulder. Beatrice covered his hand with hers. "I apologize for the delay, Your Honor," Silas said. His voice was deep, resonant, and carried a transatlantic accent that sounded like it belonged in the House of Lords. Traffic on the bridge was dreadful. Judge Calvetti scrambled to sit up straighter. "Mr. Halloway, I had no idea. I am honored. We were just concluding the divorce proceedings for your daughter." "Concluding?" Silas turned his head slowly to look at the judge. "I was under the impression you were just beginning the fraud investigation." "Fraud?" Caleb stood up, trying to regain control. "Now wait a minute. Who do you think you are barging in here? The settlement is agreed upon. Beatrice signed it." Silas Halloway finally looked at Caleb. It was like being looked at by a tiger through the glass of a cage, except there was no glass. "Sit down, boy," Silas said softly. "I will not," I said. "Sit down." The command cracked like a whip. Caleb sat. He didn't know why, but his legs simply gave out. Silas turned to the gallery. "Bring it in." Another man entered, pushing a cart stacked high with bankers' boxes. He parked it next to the defense table. "Your Honor," Silas said, stepping forward as if he owned the courtroom. "My daughter has allowed this charade to continue for 3 hours because she wanted to see exactly how far Mr. Sterling would go. She wanted to see if he would perjure himself regarding the assets, and he has done so beautifully." "This is outrageous!" Gavin shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. "My client has disclosed everything." Silas smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Really? Did he disclose the shell company Sterling Holdings, registered in Panama? Did he disclose the intellectual property rights for the logistics software, which he transferred to his mistress's name, a Miss Jessica Vane, 3 days ago?" Caleb's blood turned to ice. How could he know that? Silas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. And, perhaps most importantly, did he disclose the fact that the initial seed money for Sterling Logistics, the $200,000 he claimed he saved from hard work, was actually a personal loan from me to my daughter, signed with a clause that states in the event of a divorce, the principal investor retains 51% controlling interest in the company? Silas slammed the document onto the judge's bench. "I'm calling in my shares, Your Honor. Mr. Sterling doesn't own that company. He never did. He works for me." Caleb looked at Beatrice. She was no longer looking down. She was looking right at him, and a small, sad smile played on her lips. "Checkmate, Caleb," she mouthed. The silence that followed Silas Halloway's declaration was heavy enough to crush a man, and Caleb Sterling felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest. "You're lying," Caleb spat, the words tasting like bile. He scrambled to grab the document from the judge's bench, ignoring the bailiff who stepped forward to restrain him. "This is a forgery. I never signed any loan agreement with a controlling interest clause. Beatrice and I started this business with my savings." Silas didn't move. He simply leaned both hands on the head of his silver cane and watched Caleb unravel. "Mr. Spectre," Silas said, addressing Caleb's lawyer without looking at him, "I suggest you examine the document. Page 4, paragraph 3. You will recognize the notary stamp. It belongs to a Mr. James Sterling. That would be Caleb's late uncle, correct?" Gavin Specter's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper. He flipped to the page. His face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of grey. It's genuine, Caleb," Gavin whispered. "It's dated 5 years ago. It's notarized by your uncle. And the signature, that's your signature. Let me see that." Caleb snatched the paper. His eyes scanned the legalese. He remembered that day. He remembered Beatrice's dad coming to their cramped apartment. He remembered the old man saying he wanted to help, handing over a check for $200,000. He remembered Silas saying, "Just a formality, son. Standard protection for my daughter. Sign here, and the money is yours." Caleb had been so hungry for the cash, so desperate to buy his first 3 trucks, that he hadn't read a single word. He had just seen the zeros on the check and signed his name. He had thought the old man was a senile farmer giving away his retirement. He looked up, horror dawning on him. "You tricked me." "I engaged in a business transaction," Silas corrected smoothly. "You were the one who failed to perform due diligence. A CEO who doesn't read his contracts is a liability, and as the majority shareholder, I am now removing that liability." "You can't do this!" Caleb screamed, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. This is invalid." Judge Calvetti was sweating. He looked from the furious Caleb to the stone-faced Silas Halloway. Calvetti knew the Halloway name now that he heard it. He knew that Silas Halloway had friends in the Department of Justice. He knew that crossing this man was professional suicide. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice tight, "if this document is authentic, then you have committed perjury. You swore under oath 10 minutes ago that you were the sole owner of Sterling Logistics." "I am the owner! I built it!" Caleb roared. He pointed a shaking finger at Beatrice. "She did nothing. She sat at home while I hustled, and now she brings her daddy in to steal it from me." "Steal?" Beatrice spoke up. Her voice cut through Caleb's shouting like a razor. She stood up, walking slowly around the table. She didn't look like the broken woman from an hour ago. She looked like her father's daughter. "Caleb, do you remember the nights at the office in 2019? Beatrice asked. "When you said you were working on the dispatch software? What does that have to do with anything?" "You weren't at the office," Beatrice said. "You were at the St. Regis with a paralegal named Monica. I knew then. But I stayed. I stayed because I believed in the company. I stayed because I was fixing your mess." Beatrice picked up a file from the cart her father had brought in. "While you were having your affair, you missed the tax filing deadline for Q3. You forgot to renew the fleet insurance. The company was going to be shut down. I paid the fines. I renewed the insurance, using my inheritance from my grandmother. I cooked the books to make you look competent to the investors." She tossed the file onto the table. It slid across and hit Caleb's hand. "I didn't steal the company, Caleb," she said softly. "I saved it. You were just the mascot." The courtroom was dead silent. The court reporter had stopped typing, her mouth agape. Gavin Specter stood up. He began packing his briefcase. "Gavin," Caleb asked, panic rising in his voice. "What are you doing? Object. Do something." "I'm withdrawing as your counsel, Caleb," Gavin said, not making eye contact. "You can't leave me." I cannot represent a client who facilitates perjury and fraud, Gavin said loudly, clearly for the benefit of the judge and the record. You lied to me about the assets. You lied about the ownership structure. I'm out. I'm not losing my license for you. Gavin Spector, the shark who charged $600 an hour, walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Caleb stood alone. The $5,000 suit suddenly felt like a costume. He looked at the judge, begging for a lifeline. Your Honor. Mr. Sterling, Judge Calvetti said, his face hard. I am revoking the previous settlement agreement immediately, and in light of this new evidence regarding ownership and potential fraud, I am freezing all assets related to Sterling Logistics and your personal accounts, pending a full forensic audit. Freezing? Caleb choked. But I have a flight tonight. I have expenses. You aren't going anywhere, Silas Halloway said, because we haven't even gotten to the criminal part yet. Caleb spun around. Criminal? Silas smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who has cornered a wounded deer. You didn't think I came all the way from London just to settle a divorce, did you? I'm here for justice, Caleb. You see, when you transferred those intellectual property rights to Miss Jessica Vane 3 days ago to hide them from the divorce court, you committed wire fraud. And since the servers you used crossed state lines, that makes it a federal offense. Silas checked his pocket watch. The FBI is currently raiding your offices at the logistics center, and I believe they are paying a visit to the Plaza Hotel to speak with Miss Vane as we speak. Caleb's knees gave way. He slumped into his chair, the air rushing out of his lungs. The room spun. The victory champagne he had drunk earlier threatened to come back up. Recess! Judge Calvetti banged the gavel, sounding like a gunshot. We will reconvene in 1 hour to determine bail conditions. Bail. The word echoed in Caleb's head. The recess was meant to give everyone a moment to breathe, but for Caleb, it was a suffocating nightmare. He stumbled out of the courtroom and into the hallway. He needed air. He needed a drink. He needed to wake up. He pulled out his phone. His hands were trembling so violently he dropped it twice before he could dial. Jessica. He had to warn her. If she kept her mouth shut, maybe they could salvage this. Maybe he could claim it was a misunderstanding. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. You have reached the voicemail of Jessica Vane. He hung up and dialed again. Finally, on the 3rd try, she picked up. Jessica! Thank God! Caleb hissed, pressing the phone to his ear as he paced the marble corridor. Listen to me. Don't open the door for anyone. Get out of the hotel. Go to the safe deposit box I told you about. Get the cash. And Caleb! Her voice was shrill, hysterical. You bastard! You lying bastard! Caleb froze. Jessica, calm down! What are you? They're here, Caleb. The FBI. They're in the suite, she screamed. They took the laptop. They took the jewelry you gave me. Don't say anything, Caleb pleaded. Just tell them you don't know anything about the business. I already told them everything, she shrieked. I'm not going to jail for you. They offered me immunity if I handed over the transfer codes. I gave them the passwords, Caleb. I gave them everything. You what? And guess what? Jessica laughed, a manic, cruel sound. They told me about the accounts, the ones you said had millions in them, the ones we were going to run away with. Jessica, listen. They're empty, Caleb. The accounts are frozen. There's nothing. You're broke. You promised me the Maldives, and now I'm being handcuffed in the lobby of the plaza. The line went dead. Caleb stared at the phone, his escape plan, his money, his freedom, gone in a matter of seconds. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He jumped, spinning around, expecting the handcuffs to slap onto his wrists right then and there. But it was Arthur Prayne, Beatrice's frantic little lawyer. He looked at Caleb with a mixture of pity and professional curiosity. "Mr. Sterling," Prayne said nervously. "Mrs. Sterling, Ms. Halloway, requested a moment with you in the side chamber before the bailiff takes you into custody." "She wants to gloat?" Caleb sneered, though the fight was draining out of him. "She wants to see me beg?" "I don't think she wants you to beg," Prayne said, adjusting his glasses. "I think she just wants to say goodbye." Caleb straightened his jacket. He still had his pride, even if he had nothing else. He pushed past Prayne and walked into the small side conference room. Beatrice was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline, the same skyline Caleb had looked at an hour ago, feeling like a god. Now he felt like the pavement below. Silas was not there. It was just them. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, his voice cracking. "You ruined my life. You destroyed everything I built." Beatrice turned. The sunlight hit her face, and for the first time, Caleb noticed how tired she looked. Not weak, just weary, like someone who had been carrying a heavy load for a long time and had finally set it down. "You built nothing, Caleb," she said quietly. "We built it, and then you tried to erase me from it." "I made the deals," Caleb shouted, stepping forward. "I was the face of the company." "And I was the spine," Beatrice retorted. "You can have a face without a spine, Caleb, but it can't stand up. Today proved that." She walked over to the table where his briefcase lay, the briefcase Gavin had left behind. She opened it and pulled out the divorce decree, the one he had been so eager to sign. "You know?" she said, tracing the signature line. "If you had just been fair, if you had just offered me 50-50, if you had acknowledged the work I did, I would have let you keep the company. I didn't want the empire, Caleb. I just wanted my dignity." Caleb stared at her. You would have let me keep it?" "Yes," she said. "But then you made fun of my cardigan." Caleb blinked. "What?" "The cardigan," Beatrice said, looking down at her clothes. "You mocked me for shopping at Goodwill. You mocked my father for being a farmer. You mocked every sacrifice I made to put you in that Italian suit." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "You mistook kindness for weakness, Caleb. That was your fatal error. You thought because I was quiet, I was stupid. You thought because I didn't demand credit, I didn't have power." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, velvet box. She tossed it to him. He caught it instinctively. "What is this?" "Open it." Caleb opened the box. Inside was his wedding ring, the platinum band he had lost 3 years ago, the one he had actually thrown into a drawer because he wanted to look single at networking events. "I found it in your gym bag," she said. "I kept it. I thought maybe one day you'd ask for it back. I thought maybe the man I married was still in there somewhere." She walked to the door. "But he's gone. And now, so is the money." Beatrice opened the door. 2 federal agents were standing there, their badges glinting in the fluorescent light. "Beatrice!" Caleb lunged forward, grabbing her arm. Please, talk to your dad. Call him off. I'll do anything. We can work this out. I still love you." Beatrice looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Her expression was one of absolute indifference. It was worse than hatred. It was the look you give a stranger who has bumped into you on the subway. "My name isn't Beatrice Sterling anymore," she said, pulling her arm free. "It's Beatrice Halloway, and I don't negotiate with criminals." She stepped into the hallway, and the agent stepped in. "Caleb Sterling," the lead agent said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." As the cold metal clicked around his wrists, Caleb looked past the agents. He saw Beatrice walking away down the long corridor. At the end of the hall, Silas Halloway was waiting for her. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked out of the courthouse together, the lion and his daughter, leaving Caleb alone in the cage he had built for himself. But the story wasn't quite over, because a man like Caleb Sterling doesn't go down without trying to burn the world with him. And as he was dragged into the elevator, he saw one last face in the crowd that changed everything. The holding center in Lower Manhattan smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a far cry from the mahogany office Caleb Sterling had occupied just that morning. He sat on a metal bench, bolted to the floor, still wearing his $5,000 suit, though now the tie was gone, confiscated as a suicide risk, and the shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. He had been processing the events of the last 4 hours, the arrest, the fingerprinting, the humiliation of having his mouth swabbed for DNA like a common criminal. But Caleb wasn't broken. Not yet. His mind, always racing, always scheming, had latched onto one final lifeline, a secret he had kept even from Gavin, even from Jessica. "Sterling, lawyer!" a guard barked, banging on the bars. Caleb jumped up. He expected a high-powered fixer, maybe someone from his network who had heard the news and wanted to curry favor. Instead, a young woman walked in. She couldn't have been more than 26. She wore a cheap polyester suit and looked exhausted. She carried a heavy file under her arm and didn't offer to shake his hand. "Mr. Sterling," she said, sitting on the opposite side of the steel table. "I'm Maya Lin. I'm your public defender for the arraignment." Caleb scoffed, leaning back. "Public defender? I don't need charity. Get me the number for Halloway and Croft. Or, no, not them. Get me Dershowitz. Get me someone real." Maya didn't blink. She opened her file. "Your assets are frozen, Mr. Sterling. Every account, personal, business, offshore. You currently have zero access to funds. No private attorney will touch this case without a retainer, and you can't pay one. So, you're stuck with me." Caleb felt the walls closing in. "Fine. Listen to me, Maya. I need you to deliver a message, not to the court, to Beatrice Halloway. I am not a messenger boy, Mr. Sterling. I'm here to discuss your plea." "There is no plea." Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "Listen, I have a dead man's switch on the Sterling logistics server. If I don't enter a code every 24 hours, the entire database, client lists, shipping routes, the proprietary algorithm, deletes itself. It wipes clean. Poof." He leaned in, his eyes manic. "Tell Beatrice that if she doesn't drop the charges, if she doesn't get her daddy to back off, she inherits a hollow shell. The company will be worthless by tomorrow morning. Tell her I want a deal. I want immunity. I want $5 million, and I want a plane ticket." Maya looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. It wasn't fear. It was almost pity. "You really don't get who you're dealing with, do you?" Maya asked quietly. "I'm dealing with a librarian and an old man," Caleb sneered. "I'm the tech genius here. Without me, that software is gone. Go tell her." Maya sighed. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "I was instructed to show you this if you tried to leverage the software." She tapped the screen and turned it around. It was a video feed. It looked like the server room at Sterling Logistics. But it wasn't the dark, humming room Caleb knew. Technicians were swarming the place, and standing in the center, directing them, was a man Caleb recognized. A man he hated. That's David Chen," Caleb whispered. "He was my lead developer. I fired him 2 years ago for asking for a raise." "Mr. Chen was rehired this afternoon, by Beatrice Halloway as the new CTO, Meyer explained. And if you watch... On the screen, David Chen was typing into a console. He hit enter and gave a thumbs up to the camera. Mr. Chen helped build the system, Mr. Sterling. He knew about your back door. He knew about the kill switch. He wrote the code for it, actually, under your orders, and he just disabled it. Meyer pulled the tablet back. Beatrice Halloway has been planning this for 6 months. She located every employee you fired, every partner you cheated, every bridge you burned. She hired them all back today. They helped the FBI decrypt your files. The dead man's switch is gone. The leverage is gone. Caleb stared at the empty space where the tablet had been. He felt a physical pain in his chest, a hollowness where his arrogance used to be. She planned it? Down to the minute, Meyer said. She knew you'd try to hide assets. She knew you'd run to Jessica. She knew you'd threaten the software. She was 10 steps ahead of you while you were busy picking out your victory tie. Meyer stood up. Now, the U.S. attorney is offering a deal, pleading guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of tax evasion. 10 years in federal prison. If you go to trial, Silas Halloway will make sure they ask for 20. 10 years? Caleb choked. I can't do 10 years. I'm a businessman. Not anymore, Meyer said coldly. Now, you're just inmate 7430. I suggest you take the deal. The Federal District Court of Southern New York was a theater of war, and Caleb Sterling was the only casualty. 6 months of pre-trial detention had eroded the man who once thought he was a king. The $5,000 Italian suit he had worn on the day of the divorce was long gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He had lost 25 pounds. His hairline, once meticulously maintained, had receded further, and the grey that used to be distinguished now just looked old. As the marshals shuffled him into the courtroom, the chains around his ankles clinked with a rhythm that sounded like a funeral dirge. Clink, drag. Clink, drag. The gallery was packed. It wasn't just the press, who had dubbed him the Hamptons swindler and splashed his mugshot across every tabloid in the city. It was the people he had used. He saw the faces of the vendors he had stiffed on payments to pad his quarterly margins. He saw the drivers whose pensions he had raided to fund his trips to St. Bart's. And he saw Jessica Vane. She sat in the 3rd row, looking immaculate in white. She had cut a deal the moment the handcuffs touched her wrists. In exchange for full immunity, she had handed over the hard drives, the passwords, and the text messages where Caleb had mocked the FBI. She wouldn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of bored indifference. She was already wearing a new diamond engagement ring, a rock the size of a knuckle, presumably from the next visionary she had latched on to. But the person Caleb couldn't take his eyes off of was sitting in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. Beatrice. She didn't look like the librarian from Ohio anymore. She wore a tailored suit of midnight blue silk that cost more than Caleb's first car. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders in waves of rich chestnut. She sat next to her father, Silas Halloway. The Lion of London looked older, leaning heavily on his cane, but his eyes were alert, scanning the room like a predator, ensuring the kill was confirmed. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honourable Justice Eleanor Davies swept into the room. She was a woman known for sentences that made grown men weep. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at Caleb with an expression of clinical disappointment. "Mr. Sterling," Justice Davies began, her voice echoing in the silent room. "We have heard 3 weeks of testimony. We have seen the forensic accounting that details how you siphoned $4 million from Sterling Logistics into shell companies. We have heard the testimony of Miss Vane regarding the wire fraud. The jury took less than 2 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. Today is merely a formality to determine how long you will be removed from society. Caleb's public defender, Maya Lynn, stood up. She looked exhausted. Defending Caleb had been a nightmare. He had spent months demanding she find loopholes that didn't exist. "Your Honor," Maya said, her voice steady but resigned. "My client is a first-time offender. He built a company that employed hundreds of people. He got lost in the pressure of leadership. We ask for the minimum sentence of 5 years." The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Mr. Thorne, an associate of Halloway and Croft, stood up slowly. "The pressure of leadership?" Thorne scoffed. "Your Honor, this wasn't pressure. This was predation. Mr. Sterling didn't just steal money, he stole credit. He stole the life's work of his wife, Beatrice Halloway, and claimed it as his own. He attempted to leave her destitute while he fled the country. This wasn't a mistake. It was a malice." Thorne turned to the gallery. "The prosecution calls Beatrice Halloway to give a victim impact statement." Caleb flinched. He hadn't expected this. He thought she would stay silent. He thought she would just watch him burn. Beatrice stood up. The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the HVAC system. She walked to the podium, placing a single sheet of paper on the wood. She didn't look at the paper. She looked directly at Caleb. For a moment, Caleb saw a flash of the woman he used to know, the one who made him coffee in the morning, the one who rubbed his shoulders after a long day. He opened his mouth, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "Bay, please." "For 5 years," Beatrice began, her voice clear and melodic, devoid of the trembling that used to define her. "I lived in the shadow of a man who believed he was the sun. I was the CFO, the HR director, and the janitor of our company. When Caleb forgot to pay the taxes, I paid them. When Caleb insulted a client, I smoothed it over with gift baskets I paid for myself. I made myself small so that he could feel big." She gripped the sides of the podium. "Mr. Sterling stands here today and claims he is a businessman. But a businessman creates value. Caleb Sterling only created debt, emotional debt, financial debt, spiritual debt. He looked at me, the person who built him, and he decided I was disposable because I wore a cardigan instead of couture. He decided I was worthless because I didn't demand applause for doing the work." She turned to the judge. "He tried to destroy the company rather than let me have it. He tried to trigger a data wipe that would have cost 300 families their jobs, just to spite me. That is not the act of a flawed leader, Your Honor. That is the act of a terrorist. I don't ask for vengeance. I simply ask that the record finally reflects the truth. Caleb Sterling didn't build the empire. He was just the tenant. And his lease is up." Beatrice walked back to her seat. She didn't look at Caleb again. Caleb felt a lump in his throat that he couldn't swallow. The truth of her words hung in the air like smoke. He wanted to scream that she was lying, that he was the visionary, but looking at the faces of the jury, he knew it was over. The illusion he had crafted for a decade had shattered. "Mr. Sterling," Justice Davies said, "allocution. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" Caleb stood. His legs felt like jelly. He looked at the microphone. He thought about begging. He thought about apologizing. But then he looked at Silas Halloway. The old man was smiling, a cold, terrifying smile. Caleb croaked. He cleared his throat. "I just wanted to be someone." "You were someone," Justice Davies said sharply. "You were a husband. You were a partner. But that wasn't enough for you. You wanted to be a god. She banged the gavel. Caleb Sterling, I sentence you to 144 months, 12 years, in a federal correctional institution. Following your release, you will serve 5 years of supervised probation. Furthermore, I am ordering full restitution, all assets seized by the FBI, totaling $22 million, are hereby awarded to the victim, Beatrice Halloway, and the entity formerly known as Sterling Logistics. 12 years? Caleb gasped, clutching the table. I can't. I'll be 50 years old. You should have thought of that before you tried to defraud the federal government and your wife, Davies said. Bailiff, take him away. As the marshals grabbed Caleb's arms, dragging him back toward the holding cell, he twisted his neck to look back. He wanted one last look at her. He wanted to see a tear, a regret, anything to prove he mattered. But Beatrice wasn't watching him. She was already standing, smoothing her skirt, shaking the prosecutor's hand. She was talking to her father, laughing softly at something he said. She had already moved on. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off the light of the courtroom, leaving Caleb in the hallway, with nothing but the echo of his own heavy breathing. 1 year later, the commissary at FCI Fort Dix was a bleak place. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency, and the air always smelled of stale bread and floor wax. Inmate 7430B pushed a mop across the grey linoleum. Caleb Sterling didn't walk with a swagger anymore. He walked with the shuffle of a man who was trying to disappear. His hands, once manicured and soft, were calloused and cracked from the harsh chemicals. "Hey, Sterling," a voice shouted from one of the tables. It was Russo, a former hedge fund manager, serving 8 years for insider trading. "You see the Journal today?" Caleb didn't look up. "I don't read the papers, Russo." "You should see this one, buddy. It's about your ex." Caleb stopped mopping. He leaned on the handle, his heart doing a painful flutter in his chest. "What about her?" Russo tossed the newspaper onto the wet floor. Caleb stared at it. The headline was bold and black. Halloway Logistics Posts record Q4 profits. CEO Beatrice Halloway on the art of quiet leadership. There was a picture. It was Beatrice. She was standing on the balcony of the new headquarters in Tribeca, the building Caleb had always dreamed of buying but couldn't afford. She looked powerful, confident, and she wasn't alone. She was shaking hands with the governor of New York. Caleb knelt down, ignoring the dirty water soaking into his pant knees. He read the first paragraph. Beatrice Halloway, the daughter of legendary prosecutor Silas Halloway, has completed the turnaround of the decade. Rising from the ashes of a fraud scandal orchestrated by her former husband, she has not only saved the company, but expanded it into European markets. "We removed the toxicity," Beatrice is quoted as saying. "Once the dead weight was gone, the company finally learned to fly." Dead weight, that's what he was. "She looks good, doesn't she?" Russo laughed, cruel. "And look at the stock ticker. Up 40%. Turns out she was the brains all along." Caleb felt a tear slide down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily with his rough sleeve. He had spent a year telling himself that she would fail without him, that she would come crawling back to ask for his help with the software, that the business would crumble because she didn't have his vision. But the reality lay there on the wet floor. She hadn't just survived him. She had thrived because of his absence. Later that night, during mail call, the guard tossed a small package onto Caleb's bunk. "Package for you, Sterling, from Halloway and Croft." Caleb's hands shook as he picked it up. A lawyer's package? Was it an appeal? Had she finally felt guilty? Had she sent him money? He had written to her 3 weeks ago, a pathetic, begging letter asking for $500 for his commissary account because he was hungry and needed new boots. He ripped open the envelope. Inside there was no check. There was no letter. There was only a book. It was a paperback copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Caleb flipped it open. On the title page, there was an inscription in familiar, elegant handwriting. Caleb, you always said you liked stories about men who come from nothing and take everything. I thought you might have some time on your hands to read a real one. Don't worry about the $500. I donated it to the Caleb Sterling Fund for Financial Literacy, a charity I started to teach young women how to spot a con artist before they say, I do. Enjoy the read. Baoabe. Caleb stared at the book. A sound escaped his throat, half laugh, half sob. The cruelty of it was exquisite. It was something her father would have done. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Manhattan, the sun was setting over the Hudson River. Beatrice stood on the balcony of her penthouse office. The wind whipped her hair, but she didn't shiver. She felt warm. Silas walked out, 2 crystal glasses in his hand. He handed one to her. It was sparkling lemonade. They didn't drink alcohol at work anymore. It dulled the senses. Did he get the package? Silas asked, leaning on the railing, looking out at the city lights blinking on like diamonds. The tracking number says delivered, Beatrice said, taking a sip. Do you think it was too mean? The charity named after him? Silas chuckled, a deep rumble that sounded like a lion purring. My dear, he tried to leave you with nothing but a suitcase of old clothes. You gave him a library book and a legacy. I'd say you were incredibly generous. Beatrice smiled. She turned her back to the view, looking instead at the reflection in the glass door. She saw herself, not Caleb's wife, not Silas's daughter, just Beatrice. He called me Silence once, she mused. He said my silence was boring. He was a fool, Silas said, clinking his glass against hers. He didn't know the difference between silence and patience. Well, Beatrice said, finishing her drink and setting the glass down on the railing. He has 12 years of silence ahead of him now. I hope he learns the difference. She turned back to the open door of the boardroom, where her executive team, David Chen, the new CFO, and the bright young minds she had hired, were waiting for her. Ready for the strategy meeting, Ms. Halloway? David asked. Beatrice Halloway straightened her blazer. She stepped out of the cold night air and into the warmth of the room where she belonged. Yes, she said. Let's get to work. We have an empire to build. And that is how Caleb Sterling went from a celebratory glass of champagne to a tin cup in a federal prison cell. He thought he was playing chess against a quiet housewife, but he never realized he was actually playing against a grandmaster and his queen. It's a brutal reminder that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone loading their weapon. What do you think? Did Beatrice go too far with the setup, or did Caleb get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. Team Beatrice or Team Caleb? If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next chaotic story of revenge and redemption. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you underestimate.